Hello, all. It's a snowy Tuesday in Buffalo, which
So it's just
normally.
Tuesday then.
Well, no. I mean, unusual. This winter has been unusual. That this is like the first significant snow that we've received. I think all the ski lodges and courses down in the southern part of below the city of Buffalo, south of Buffalo is what we consider the snow belt. That's where all like Kissing Bridge and all these different ski courses are. And I swear they were going bankrupt because up until like even a week ago, they were manufacturing snow and it really wasn't warm or cold enough for them to keep the snow on the ground. So there was no skiing, and now they're finally getting some snow. So I'm sure they're relieved. Well, we're gonna have Kevin Allen today, but I wanted to start off with this just because, and this is me. This is my personal feeling.
Oh,
There are
wait, so this is a viewpoint from the angel of death. Is that
yes,
what? Okay?
there are certain sporting events that enthrall me, that capture me, that even though I'm not a fan of the sport, like I'm not big into soccer, but I love the World Cup. The World Cup it's very interesting. It's very tense. I could give a crap less about U.S. college football. So like I didn't watch 1 second of the game last night between Clemson and Alabama until a friend of mine texted me and said, "Oh my God, look what happened!" And I watched it for like 3 minutes and then went back to the Vancouver, Florida game. Russ, I mean, I don't get it. I mean, maybe it's from the fact that I'm from a metropolitan area like Buffalo. There's not a big college football presence here. You're from, around the New York City area where it's Rutgers and, there's not that many big
It was nothing.
college football programs. I mean, to me, I don't know. I don't get the excitement of college football.
I guess when there was nothing else around, like if you're in a place like Nebraska, what else do you have? So I would get behind college football then too. So I can't kill anybody for it. And I love college hockey for some reason. But I guess this is my big problem with college football. And this is when people can start hating on me if they want. Like college hockey resembles pro hockey.
Mhm.
College football in no way, shape, or form resembles pro football, and that's the part of me intellectually that checks out.
Well, that's the Tim Tebow, Johnny Manziel argument. They were,
Right.
in terms of college football players, they were at the top level. They won national championships or won Heisman trophies, and in the pros, they're nothing, or they have been nothing.
Right.
So, I mean, Peter, maybe you're insulated from this because you're in Canada, and I don't know how big U.S. college football is north of what is it, the 49th parallel. But I mean, I know,
Oh,
everybody in
Peter, Peter,
Canada.
wait. Peter, don't try and cross the bridge. Don't do it. I'm just letting you know. Stay safe.
You know, it's fairly big up here because I think a lot of Canadians, at least sports fans, would like to have a little more enjoyment out of the CIS football and basketball that we see to south of us, and I think there's real interest in March Madness for sure, and I think there's a love of football, and they like seeing the college game because it's a kind of spectacle that we don't get up here for our college games, and I think there's a fairly decent segment of sports fans who really appreciate the sport and what goes on with it. And it's on 6 channels up here too, just like it is down there, and it's it's there. And it's fun. I watched the second half last night, and I totally enjoyed it. I'm a bit of a football fan, but not any kind of student of the game or anything. But I enjoyed watching it and could sort of see the interest in it, and why if you're a sports fan, you'd probably want to watch that game. It was an entertaining game.
Well, ESPN did something, and I heard what they were going to do beforehand, and I needed to check it out just for a second just to see what it was like. And I know that like for all the different channels that they had, ESPN Classic News, all ESPNU, ESPN2, they had like a different aspect of the game. On ESPN2, they had basically somebody analyzing the game from both sides, the game in a small screen in the corner, the replay going back and forth, them analyzing it as the play was going on, and the people talking about it. On another channel, they had the camera from the end zone, the pylon from the corner of the end zone. I mean, some of it's interesting, some of it is just silly. Who wants to watch the game from the viewpoint of the pylon?
Yeah, especially if you're getting crushed.
Maybe the Pylons family. Maybe they miss him.
I don't know. We talk a lot about pylons in hockey. Maybe it's
I was gonna say, is the pylon related to some NHL defenseman? Possible. But okay. Hi, Kevin. How's it going?
Good.
Did you get a chance to see any of the championship game, the college football game? I mean,
I actually didn't. So I was watching some hockey, and I just didn't go there. So
good. Good, because I watched very few minutes of it and switched to what I thought was a pretty entertaining game between the Florida Panthers and the Vancouver Canucks. And I want to start with that, but let's do the intros first. Peter, you follow me, and then we'll go that way. Hello, Hockey World. Today is Tuesday, January 12th, 2016.
Hi, I'm Peter Testia, covering the Winnipeg Jets.
I'm Russ Cohen from Sportsology.
I'm Kevin Allen of USA Today Sports.
And I'm Michael Agello, and this is the HockeyBuzzcast here on HockeyBuzz.com. Kevin, like I said, I was watching most of the games last night. There was the New York Rangers score a goal late in the third period to beat the Boston Bruins. A few other interesting contests, but the one I focused on was the Florida Panthers against the Vancouver Canucks. Florida going into the game had a 12-game winning streak. That streak was snapped. Jake Virtanen gets a goal late in the third period to tie the game, and then Daniel Sedin scores in overtime to end the streak. The thing that was most interesting about it, to some people, was the post-game shenanigans that happened. From what I gather from the reports this morning, there was some interchange between Sean Thornton from the Panthers and some of the Canucks, namely one of the Sedins. Henrik Sedin skated by the Panthers bench, which, Russ, that sort of made me think about like the Dan Cloutier thing from a while back when he skated in front of the Islanders bench. And then Derek Dorsett all of a sudden attacks Al Montoya, the backup goaltender, and I thought we were going to have a Pier 6 brawl, Kevin. It was pretty entertaining.
Well, it was. I mean, I didn't see that live, and people had emailed me about it, and I looked at, watched it the first thing this morning, and I was just struck by, the instigator of it all, or so that it appeared, was the Sedins, who are two of the, both the Sedins are so classy. So, I mean, I knew right away before I even read the copy that someone must have said something.
Yeah.
Because they don't react like that. And then when I saw that it might have been Sean Thornton, then it all started to make sense to me how that all happened. But I think what I take from that is suddenly the Florida Panthers are relevant. Like if it was the old Florida Panthers and a Canucks team that's been up and down, we wouldn't care. But suddenly we're interested in what happens to the Florida Panthers, and I think it's kind of a sign of the times that suddenly we pay attention, and when they almost get in a big brawl, we want to know why, what happened. So, but I mean that was a tough loss for the Panthers because they're really, really taking advantage of this momentum they got, and they did not want to lose that game. Like that was a major loss for them.
Russ, I mean, noticeably absent from that game was Aaron Ekblad, who took a high hit in a game against Edmonton, and I think Matt Hendricks got a 3-game suspension.
Yeah.
I think after watching that game, you realize how important, even at 19 years old, Aaron Ekblad is to that team.
I mean, he's amazingly important. I noticed even last year, basically offensive players would take a different route rather than trying to take on Ekblad and try and go to the net. They go to the other side. So they still do that now, and Ekblad is pretty physical and he's good at getting the puck out, and you're gonna miss a guy like that. Like as good as we know that the Florida Panthers are, I would say half the reason is Aaron Ekblad. He's a big reason.
Peter, you covered the Canucks. You covered the Canucks for a time, and I want to get your comments on the Panthers. But I wanted to ask you: the Canucks are in a weird situation right now because only because of that division are they really in the race for the playoffs. They're sort of beginning that transition. They put Chris Higgins on waivers today because apparently they couldn't find any takers for him at his 100% salary of $2.5 million. So they may have to, eat money or maybe even bury him down in Utica for a while before they get somebody interested. But right now, they seem to be, focused more on playing the Jared McCanns, the Jake Virtanens, the Bo Horvats, and they're starting to go away from the veteran players. Do you think this is like a rebuild, or do you think they're going to still try to make the playoffs and just go through the transition as they compete for a playoff spot?
I think Benning and Linden are at the point of trying to decide what they have right now, and they need to see it live because they're so raw into this that they haven't had a chance to see it in the AHL. Mm-hmm. I mean, it also doesn't, help them that their team is sitting there in Utica, far away. It's not the easiest place for them to get to. I mean, they can get there, but it's not like popping into another major market. The other issue is that you've got a trade deadline coming up. You've got pieces like Verbata, Higgins. There's some talk that even Dan Hamhuis might be available. Now, I think Hamhuis has a pretty much ironclad NTC on that, but if you're a contender, you'd like Dan Hamhuis on your team. That's for sure. The challenge here with everything is no one really understands what the Canucks' direction is and what their end goal is. What we do know is Jim Benning is a master scouter. That's his his inner essence of who he is. He loves the scouting. He loves to prospect players. So what happens there? What is he trying to achieve with that? And no one really has a good idea. We don't know what the end game is for them. And the fact that they're hanging around, and the fact that we know we have an owner who has told publicly that making the playoffs should be a goal every year, it leaves you a lot of guessing about what the Canucks want to do.
Some news came over the wire about an hour and a half ago that normally we wouldn't associate it with hockey, but it's going to have major implications if things continue to go this way. And this isn't CNBC or Fox Business News, but this is important. The Canadian dollar dipped below 70 cents for the first time in 13 years, which you heard the crashing oil prices a couple days ago, and you knew that there would be some sort of adjustment there. But this is going to have, Kevin, this is going to have ramifications not only for escrow, but for the salary cap, because apparently the projections at the GM's meetings in December were based on an 80 cent dollar, Canadian dollar, and now if the Canadian dollar is at 65 to 70 cents, you can pretty much throw away that $3 million escalator for the salary cap next year.
Well, for sure. I mean, and just to sort of for our viewers to get a handle on this, I mean, think about that big Canadian television contract that they got, and right away, I think the last time I saw anyone check on it, it was worth about $800 million less U.S. And now with the Canadian dollar falling even further, it's got to be worth maybe $1 billion less than it was before. The top three of the top six markets in terms of revenue are Toronto, Montreal, and Vancouver, and they all get all their dollars in Canadian dollars. So this is going to have an impact on the league. It's not catastrophic, but it for the salary cap situation and teams trying to squeeze an extra $500,000 here and there, it'll be a big deal. It would be major if it doesn't go up $2 or $3 million this season.
It's going to have a huge impact, and if you're someone like the Toronto Maple Leafs, though, and I'm not sure why focuses on you when I talk, Kevin. So if you could just move your mouth here while I talk, I'm not sure what that means. Like for someone like the Toronto Maple Leafs, you're probably loving it if you're going to take a run at that Steven Stamkos, because it's just going to lock a lot of other guys out of the park in terms of revenue. I mean, they've got infinite revenue. They don't care. But
they actually have. But the thing is, Peter, they're actually going to have cap space, and they're actually going to have the willingness to use it. Whereas other teams, they may have cap space, but they have their budgets, and with the we just lost him. But with the revenue going down, you might have a more limited window of where Stamkos could go. There might be 3 or 4 teams being able to spend $10 to $10.5 million for Stamkos, whereas if the cap was going up $3 million, maybe it'd be double that. So
Well, it's going to affect the trading deadline for sure, because now GMs have to sort of look into next year and say, all right, well, I guess I'm not getting that extra player from this extra money. So now how am I going to alleviate this trading deadline? So I think there's going to be a little bit more salary dumping than we would normally see.
Well, Kevin, doesn't this make the teams? Doesn't this make rental players even more valuable instead of players with a year or two left in their deals, because teams just don't want to lock themselves in?
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. Now a rental is certainly preferable because you don't want to carry that forward. And we talked about this yesterday about the fact that the Red Wings, were concerned not so much about where their cap hit was, but where they were in terms of their budget, because they didn't want to get caught where they've got to pay bonus overages for next season because they're already planning for the summer. And then they had ended up Drew Miller got hurt again, and they were able to accomplish what they needed because he had an MCL tear, and he'll be out. Otherwise, they would have had to do something pretty drastic. And I think we are. I think Russ is right. We're going to see teams at least attempt to dump some salary, but I don't know that's going to be easily accomplished. I think there are going to be some teams that there won't be as many teams willing to take salary as we would have anticipated earlier.
Peter,
Well, I guess now, like, if we look at like a Keith Yandel, if there was any hope the Rangers were going to sign him next year, if they don't move a big salary, it's not going to happen, right? So now they pretty much do have to trade him unless they move another big salary in the deal or in another deal, and so that is going to impact teams that way.
Well, Peter, how is it going to affect a team like Winnipeg? I mean, we know they don't. What is the capacity of the MTS? Around 14.5, 15?
No, it's about 15.3 right now.
Okay, so we know that the building will sell out, but we know that the amount of revenue is limited based on the size of the building. So now extrapolate that to the summer when you have guys like Ladd and Bufflin who are looking for long-term deals. Do you think that the decrease of the Canadian dollar affects the ability of Cheveldayoff to sign either one of them, or is it a choice of one or the other? I mean, how do you think this ties in with the Jets?
I think the bigger picture is what the plan is for Cheveldayoff. We're not even certain what he wants to do. With Bufflin right now, it was believed, and this is on the old Cap Geek site, and I used to look this up just to confirm it, but it was on Cap Geek, it listed Bufflin as saying he had to submit 5 teams every July 1st of who he would not be traded to. So that was the impression everyone had been operating. I had heard nothing to contradict that for years. 2 weeks ago, or maybe even less, Gary Lawless of TSN tweeted back to me when I asked him about that. He said, no, 10 teams, he gets 2 weeks after the Jets make a trade request, and before he went away for a week, that request had not been made. So now factor in the timelines here with a Bufflin. He's got 2 weeks to tell Chevy, so you're going to have to really back up the bus. You can't make that deal unless Bufflin says, well, I can do it sooner than that, without giving him 2 weeks. And I guess, Kevin, you would, and Russ, you'd probably understand this better than myself, but how an agent works with that in terms of, do you want to use all that time? Do you not want to use that time? There's some pressure on to push back to the GM with that. You could put him right up till the day before the trade deadline and not have any idea of where he can trade him to. So does the Canadian dollar affect it? I think it does. Jets owner Mark Shipman has said they've been hedging for a while against the Canadian dollar, however that works. I would think having the richest owner in the league as your partner would hopefully give you some security. We don't know. I don't think it does, but you would hope. And then there's the aspect of does it make sense for them to afford Bufflin and Ladd long term if their revenue sharing from the broadcast deal is going down too for any determined period of time? I mean, can they afford to keep them even, let alone can someone else afford to sign them? The good news, Kevin, is what you said, is that because they're both expiring, teams might pay more if you want to load up for a run. And I think right now the one team that most people are curious about is Dale Talon talking to Kevin Cheveldayoff with their friends about Dustin Byfuglien and or Andrew Ladd? I wonder, because that would make a lot of sense to me.
Wow.
Yeah, to me too. I also think that, you know, there are going to be several suitors for both of those players, but, you know, I think Ladd, for example, would be a great fit on the Montreal Canadiens.
Yes.
And I think Byfuglien would be a great fit on the Anaheim Ducks. There'll be no shortage of suitors. So it'll just be a matter. That's why I think Winnipeg is going to break the bank in terms of what they're going to get for those players, particularly Byfuglien. Like I'm convinced it's at least a first-round pick and a really good prospect, and maybe a B prospect too.
Well, this is a nice
I would hope so.
This is a nice transition into what I wanted to talk about, because wasn't sure if we were going to have Kevin on the show today. And Kevin, you wrote an article in the USA Today over the weekend regarding, you know, 5 teams that you think are probably looking, you know, for a significant deal before the trade deadline, and the one that you listed as number 1 was the Montreal Canadiens. Now, news comes out today that Carey Price he went on the ice for the first time since the lower body injury that he had that's kept him out for almost 2 months. He went on the ice without equipment, so it's just he's just starting to get back into things. He's clearly not going to come back before the All-Star break, so this is looking like early February, which I think is almost 2 months if he comes back at that point. But right now, the Canadiens have been just slowly declining. Well, and you know, to the point now that their position in terms of a playoff spot is in question. Kevin, I think they have to make a deal one way or the other, whether Price comes back, you know, soon or later. I think they need to shore up their problem areas without Price to make them stronger when Price does eventually come back.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I mean, I think it's the problem that everybody identified coming into the season that didn't look like a problem when they got off to the great start. But, you know, they have trouble. They have to work so hard to get a goal. And the one thing that we've heard all season is that, you know, they don't get to the net. And, you know, anybody who watched the Winter Classic, you know, all of their goals in that came within close proximity of the net. And, you know, but they haven't done that on a consistent basis, and that's been a problem. So I think Bergevin, who I think has done a really fine job with the Canadiens, I think he's going to have to try to be aggressive and change the look up front. And to me, it's just a matter of, you know, maybe just getting one guy to play in the top 6, and then, you know, somebody falls down, obviously, and you get everybody back playing the roles that they should play. But I wouldn't be shocked if they had 2 players, to be honest, at the trade deadline.
Russ, they've had a tendency to go in both directions. The big name rental with Vanek, and then last year they made all these smaller moves, getting the Torrey Mitchells. Those, you know, good moves, but they weren't earth-shattering. To me, where the Canadiens are right now, I think it fits more of the big splash, you know, top 6, as Kevin said. A guy like Eric Stahl. I keep going back to Eric Stahl. You know, maybe that works, maybe that doesn't work. The $8.25 million salary is going to be a problem, and Carolina would probably have to eat money. But I think that they need to make that kind of splash to, you know, make themselves legitimate again when Price comes back.
Yeah, they definitely need to add offense, but they can't add offense if it's going to hurt their defense either. And that's where the Stahl problem may come in, and that's where Andrew Ladd is probably more of a plus for them, because he would cover both ends of that, because they do have to sort of alleviate a little bit of the problem for the goaltending. It's not like their goaltending isn't good enough to hold up. The Rangers had Cam Talbot hold up for them last year, and I'm sure Bergevin's thinking the same thing, but they just need a little bit more grit in their top 6, and someone like Ladd would be perfect for that.
Yeah, goaltending, because you're right. The Condon, Tokarski until he was traded, Ben Scrivens have given them adequate goaltending. It's the fact that PK Subban, I think, has 2 goals.
2 goals.
Giannis has 1 goal in 25 games. I mean, Peter, do you think – I mean, Ladd is an excellent player. He's won a couple Stanley Cups. I mean, do you think he's the type of player that if you plug him in with the Canadiens, he could have a dramatic and positive effect?
I think Ladd probably needs a new start. He's a totally great individual when you don't have to lean on him to be something he's not, right? Like he's just he's I like Ladd. I think he's a great player. I think he's durable. I think he does lots of the right things. What he doesn't really do is bring that sort of elite individual force to a game that I think people are expecting him to have. And that's where it gets challenging when you look at Ladd. You want him, but he's not quite that guy. So on a Montreal, I think he could be an amazing accessory to him if he doesn't have to all of a sudden come in and be a savior. Let the regular guys shoulder the load and let Ladd come in and be that player that he is. Great in front of the net. Works hard in the offensive zone until it's the third period and he takes a dumb penalty. But he gets goals, and he consistently does it, and that's what the Canadians need.
Kevin, we talked about Tampa Bay yesterday and Drouin. From everything that's coming out in the last 24 hours, it's like I know Elliot Friedman from Sportsnet in his 30 Thoughts column today said that the unknown team that really hasn't been mentioned that much in terms of being interested in him is one of the teams that we talked about yesterday, which was the Anaheim Ducks. And like we said yesterday, they have defensemen. They have young defensemen who are around the same age as Drouin, who are controllable, and that could be the direction. If they could get a Vatanen or a Lindholm, that might be a good fit for Steve Yzerman for a guy like Drouin.
Well, for sure. I don't think there's any question about that. And Drouin is, as we mentioned yesterday, everybody who is looking at adding Drouin is thinking about Kyle Turris and Tyler Seguin. Those are two guys who were both with teams, were traded away and then became the players that everyone thought they were going to be. And I think if you're Yzerman, you've got to have that in mind as well, because you got to be careful. You can't afford to make that kind of deal. But if you get back, Lindholm or Vatanen as part of the trade, and I suspect if those are the players that we're talking about, this could end up being a multiplayer trade. I don't see them getting traded for one player. Maybe I'm wrong, but I could see that becoming a multiple player trade. But I would like that trade from both teams' perspective, because Drouin, although he really has not shown the sort of capabilities that everyone had projected on him when he was first drafted. If you remember, everybody was talking. I remember specifically saying that he was actually the guy they felt was most ready, and he got sent back to junior right away.
Yeah, very quickly.
Yeah. So he really has not. Now, saying all that, he's trying to crack a team with a lot of skilled forwards. Mm-hmm. It's not an easy slot for him to get into the top six when you have the triplets already set, and Stamkos being fully established and liking to do things the way he likes to do them. So it has been difficult for him, but I think that is a good fit, and I could see that being the best option for Yzerman if it comes. A lot's going to depend, I think, on how Drouin again plays. It's tomorrow night he plays again, because I've talked to folks that said people want to see that he's healthy, which he has shown over these 3 games, but also that he still has that dynamic nature to him, because he hasn't been able to show that in Tampa.
No, and he showed it on the 2 goals that he scored on Friday. Right. Literally blew by the Albany defense, but then I've heard he played well in the other 2 games, but didn't really stand out.
He's not going to score 10 goals in 3 games. It's not going.
No, it's
not in that league.
No, but I think people were expecting him to score 4 goals in 4 games.
Well, he still could have another 2-goal game. I don't put it past him. You go back to Turris, and Phoenix got David Rundblad for Turris. They got killed on that deal.
Yeah. In a second-round pick. I was going to say at least Boston got Riley Smith and Louis Eriksson. They didn't get the advantage in the deal, obviously, but they got return.
Right.
In the Phoenix Ottawa deal, they got robbed blind.
They did.
And that's what Yzerman has to guard against. He's got to get something that can help him tangibly now and in the future. He can't. I don't think he can give up, Durant and get somebody who can help him for a year or 2. He needs somebody who he can have as part of his maybe not core group, but part of his group for 5, 6, 7 years.
But here's the thing, like, what are we talking about? Even if you started from scratch as an organization and pretended you drafted Jonathan Drouin today, he still has elite speed, he still has way above average hands, and he still has a way above average shot. Somebody's going to be able to work with him and turn him into a player.
And based on watching Anaheim of the last couple games when they played the Leafs and another game, they need somebody with jets. Their team speed is
Totally
below average, very below average.
Like, as an example, if you put Drouin and Carl Hagelin together, who's covering that?
I agree. Now, two more teams that Kevin mentioned in the column, the St. Louis Blues, and the funny thing is they started to get back some of their players. They had a lot of injuries earlier in the season. Now, all of a sudden, Stastny is hurt again, but although it's not supposed to be a long-term injury. Carl Gunnarsson's hurt. They lost another defenseman. Jaden Schwartz still isn't back. They don't have a ton of cap room, but we've heard Shattenkirk's name being circulated. Apparently, if there was a Ryan Johansson deal with St. Louis, Shattenkirk was going to be the piece going back to Columbus. I think it's a safe assumption to say that Seth Jones was a better return than Kevin Shattenkirk for Ryan Johansson. But I mean, I think there needs to be a change there, and Ken Hitchcock's the clock on him is ticking.
Yeah, and I think that, to me, the thing that the Blues are looking at least they have to look at this, is that the Blackhawks have really found their pace. Like, if you watch the Blackhawks now, like they're getting into playoff mode already, and you got to make sure you can keep up with them in the postseason. So I think the Blues are feeling pressure. There's no future for them. It's all about now, and I think they do have to make. I think what the Jaden Schwartz injury showed them, as I said in my column, is that they're not quite as deep offensively as they need to be. So for that reason, I think because Schwartz is eventually going to be back, and then they'll be much better. But even with him back, I think they could use another scorer. And I think if they're not in on Drouin, I think they'll be looking around. They obviously poked at Johansson. They feel the same way, because there's a lot of nice parts in St. Louis, but maybe not quite as much as people think there are.
Yeah, the funny thing about them is, and I think this season started off weird for them when, like, Ken Hitchcock basically said this 3-on-3 was going to be chaos, and it wasn't. And then I don't think this season's going the way they thought it would go, or thought it would go, and I think they're losing grip a little bit. I mean, if they want to keep up with the Blackhawks, for one thing, the Blackhawks just extended Quenneville another 3 years, right? So that's, so they've got security there. They've got their coach for the future still, and they've got Corey Crawford. There is nobody comparable in St. Louis in net to Corey Crawford, and that's going to be their biggest thing. Their biggest hope is somebody else eliminates the Blackhawks in the playoffs, because it's not going to be them.
Yeah, and I mean, to his defense, I think Jake Allen has played a lot better this year. He's been very solid.
Regular season.
Regular season. Well, and the playoffs are completely different. Like, Washington has to prove something in the playoffs in the East. St. Louis has to prove something in the West. But I think the problem here is, and Kevin made the point, if you stop Tarasenko, you stop them. I mean, they don't. We thought that they had this great offensive, and maybe the trade of T.J. Oshie, even though he didn't score a ton with them. He was secondary offense. You had Tarasenko, Laterra, and Schwartz as that number one line last year, and then you had secondary guys like Backes and Steen and Oshie who were providing that secondary offense. And now with the injuries, that's not.
Schwartz is a big loss. We don't want to minimize it. And Fabry got a chance because of Schwartz being out and because of that deal. And so when they do get Schwartz back, the offense will be better. But and their defense is always going to be solid. But again, I still go back to, you're in the playoffs. I'm in a Game 5 or a Game 6. If I'm playing the Blackhawks and it's Jake Allen against Corey Crawford, I'm not feeling great about it.
The other team was the New York Rangers, and I know, Russ, you and I talked about potential scenarios for a guy like Pete Yandel. I mean, they lost 2-1 to the Bruins yesterday, or they won 2-1. I'm sorry, over
They
the,
won
over the
2-1.
Bruins. Yeah, over the Bruins. Excuse me, on a Jesper Fast goal. But the thing was, it was nip and tuck. It was like the Bruins aren't exactly scoring like the Dallas Stars. You know, they had a 1-0 lead. The Rangers got a goal early in the third and barely won in regulation. And the Bruins are without Krejci and a lot of their offensive players. So, right now the Rangers are just a bit above that. And I think, you're not getting production out of Rick Nash. And now you're talking about trading one of your better offensive defensemen in Yandel because he's going to walk away for nothing. They're at a crossroads.
They're at a crossroads. They've got $1.2 million cap space today, which isn't a lot. So if they were going to acquire someone like a Drouin is perfect, right? Because they're on an entry level, but they still would have to make a move just to fit in a guy like that. So all the magic moves are pretty much done for the Rangers. Like anything, and look, I wasn't a big proponent of this Yandel deal because of the mortgage and because of the Duclair factor and because of the ability to re-sign him. Like I knew that was going to be an issue because Stahl and Girardi had these no-move clauses that are so hard to move out. Now, interesting thing about yesterday's game is the Rangers, while their defense was solid all game, it essentially got a little more mobile when Dan Girardi went out with the lacerated hand. And, Girardi fans don't want to hear it, and I'm a big fan of Dan Girardi, but his body is starting to break down little by little. It just happens. You never know what age. When when you go through the John Tortorella shot blocking days and then now still shot blocking but still having to play at a pace where it's hard, they were actually a little bit better. All that said, that Jimmy Hayes shot, should Lundqvist have stopped it? Probably. It was a far-out shot. You don't see too many go in like that. He battened down the hatches after that, but, compared to the beginning of the year to now, I would say Lundqvist has lost a little bit of confidence, too, because he sees a little bit of the team in front of him has declined a little. So they're in a tough spot. They're going to have to trade Yandel. While they're not trading Yandel, McElrath sits on the bench, and he doesn't play. And whether you think he was great or not, he needs to be playing, and he's not playing. So that's a big problem, too. So if they sit him for another couple weeks and then they find out they do have to trade Yandel, then essentially you're either going to have to send him on a conditioning assignment or throw him in cold. That's tough, or bring up Brady Shea or Matt Bodie, somebody like that. They're in a rough spot. I think Jesper Fast is an underutilized guy on that team, and he used to be a great power play guy. I was at an event with him not that long ago where I told him, hey, you look great on the power play in the World Juniors, and he reminded me he was their best power play guy in Hartford, but he doesn't get those chances on the Rangers. He might get 20 seconds. He's a right-handed shot. They need a right-handed shot on the power play. He's starting to score more this year because he's fit into Vigneault's system. Maybe his role needs to be expanded. That's something where Vigneault has been slow in doing with a lot of guys is putting, let's say, Stahl and Girardi deciding, hey, if I want to keep this pairing, maybe they should go to the second pairing, and maybe I should elevate Klein and Yandel. Maybe that's something I should do and see how that works. He hasn't really done much of that, and Fast is another guy that is worth experimenting with.
Peter, Russ made some references last week during the webcast and maybe even yesterday about things going in New York with Alain Vigneault maybe going the way they started to in Vancouver at the end. Maybe the message was starting to get tuned out. Maybe he's starting to show his frustrations. Is that what happened in Vancouver? Did the players start to tune him out? It was time for a change.
I think there was a little bit of that. I mean, Vigneault plays a very disciplined style of hockey in that it's a system. He has a very distinct process that he wants players to do. And what happens is you don't play it and you get in the doghouse. He's always got a player in the doghouse. He has a doghouse and he's got someone in it. And if you do it well, it kind of drains on you. But he doesn't adapt very quickly. As Russ said, he's slow. It's a slow process. It took him forever, and the Sedins talking to him to ask to play the penalty kill because they could see that their teammates are getting burned out, and that if they were in penalty trouble, they were sitting on the bench doing nothing. And they
have a problem playing Edler. Like, wasn't Edler getting sporadic play with him too?
Yeah, Edler was as well. And I mean, if I went back a few years and looked at it, I could kind of come up with all these examples like Edler. It happens, and that's just him. He's got a weird kind of essence with that. Interesting enough, about 5-6 years ago, I was at an event when the Manitoba Moose were here, and I was talking to Jason Jaffrey, and this is after Jaffrey was the Moose coach in Winnipeg. And Vignon was the coach in Vancouver. And I said, "Yeah, you got to go hang out with the old coach. How was he?" He said 2 words for me over the course of a month. I was like, "What?" And he goes, "Yeah." He goes, I said, "I thought you would have sort of connected." And he goes, "He's not really coaching us." And I said, "He's coaching some guys, but for me, I only talked to the assistant coaches. That was it." And I was very interested in that. And that was sort of a very telling thing about Vignon, who's a very likable guy. Very popular, like very friendly when he's out of the, not behind the bench. Very jovial, but it very caught me off guard that, that was what he was to one of his former players who was a key guy in his AHL days.
Let's move on to, we know we referenced it yesterday, talking about the sort of the halfway candidates for some of the major awards. We were going to talk about the Jack Adams, so we may as well do that today. At the halfway point in the season, the Dallas Stars are leading the Western Conference, the Washington Capitals leading the Eastern Conference. Kevin, I would think that either or both of Lindy Ruff and Barry Trotz would have to be on most lists for the Jack Adams. But what I'm looking for are the guys who are probably not being talked about as much, who I think are deserving. Who do you have as, say, your top 3 candidates for these?
Well, I mean, I think John Hines certainly in New Jersey is going to get some consideration to be sure. I mean, nobody was predicting anything positive for the Devils coming into the season, and he has them competing. And to be honest, I think Gerard Gallant deserves some recognition too. Like, you look at that Panthers team, and yesterday we talked about it a little bit. Like, I like everything about that team and where it's headed, and I like the roster, but it's not a cohesive team yet. Like, it's not. They haven't sorted out. They don't have guys where everybody knows their roles. They're still sorting that out. So there's still a bit of a patchwork design to it, and somehow Gallant has done a really good job of making sure that team is in contention and has run off this long winning streak. And then, the other guy that I think has really done, a remarkable job is Mike Babcock. He's never going to get any votes because the team is so bad. But, you look at that roster, and what everyone is talking about at the management level is just how competitive they are now compared to the way they used to be when they weren't competitive. So I think Trotz is deserving of this. May be his year because he's transformed that roster. So I would actually have him number 1. I would have probably Gallant number 2, and I'd have Hines and Lindy Ruff as my 3rd and 4th candidates.
Russ?
Yeah, I've got Gerard Gallant first. I mean, again, the job he's doing there is tremendous. It's nothing that anybody really expected. We talked about him being good, but talking about him being good and being good are always 2 different things. I got Jeff Blashill second. I really, he had the guts to put Dylan Larkin on the top line. Maybe he had no choice, but a lot of guys wouldn't do that with a rookie, and they're still hanging in the race. And I think with some of the aging talent and everything else there, I think he's done a tremendous job. And then 3rd and 4th, I'm with Kevin. It's like I got Hines, I got Lindy Ruff. It's hard to distinguish who's 3rd and who's 4th, but both have really done solid jobs. I mean, I guess if I had to lean towards one, it might be Hines, just because nobody had the Devils doing anything. Probably somebody picked them last, I'm sure. And so that's a big deal.
Peter?
Yeah, I've got Trotz Ruff as my 1-2. You could put them back and forth either way. I've got Gallant 3, Blashill 4, and then kind of a sleeper one, I think worth some consideration, although it's probably not going to be a popular choice, is Mike Yeo in Minnesota. I think he's doing a good job. I think the Wild are sort of exceeding where they should be, and I just think he deserves a little bit of credit there. He's not going to win it, but he deserves credit.
My list, I mean, Ruff and Trotz are no-brainers because of the way their teams have played. I agree with Hines. To me, my dark horse is Dave Tippett in Arizona. Who expected the Arizona Coyotes? I know that the division is bad, but they lost Mike Smith, and Louis Domingue has come in, and he's played really well, and they're getting offense from Duclair and Domi, and they sort of have that same hodgepodge thing that Florida has or New Jersey has. New Jersey brought in Lee Stempniak on a PTO. Arizona brings back Antoine Vermette, and they got Bodker and these other guys who might get traded at the deadline, but if they're in a playoff spot, I don't know if Don Maloney is going to dump players. I think he'll probably keep them because they need to make the playoffs in that market. And I think Tippett, after a really difficult year last year, before then he had the reputation of being a really good a coach who stressed defense. And it seems that Arizona has gotten back to that in some ways. I mean, I think you can do just so many things with limited talent, and if you give them enough talent, they can win games. And I thought they were going to drop off after the first quarter, but they're sticking around. So I think he's done a fantastic job. Let's move on to the Calder, and then we'll talk about another award tomorrow. Again, if you look at the rookie totals, I mean, I think the no-brainers right now, and if we would have said this at the beginning of the year before the year started, it would have been McDavid and Eichel, and I don't even have them in my top 5 right now. Maybe Eichel would be 5th, but McDavid, after the injury, he would have to have an immense second half to climb back into the top 3. But right now, Panarin and Larkin are 1-2 on, I think, many people's lists. Kevin, who do you have besides those two, or if you have others?
Well, I mean, Panarin is 1 and Larkin is 2 for me. I do like both of them, but I think here's a projection more than anything else. I think in the second half of the season, Eichel's going to climb back in contention. That's just a feeling I have. You're starting to see him sort of emerge now, really starting to getting his confidence. And the other thing I would point out is what you do, and we'll just use last year as an example with Forsberg. What you do in the second half is far more important than what you do in the first half, for sure. Sports writers seem to have short memories, and whatever happens in the second half of the season, generally resonates. So those are, as good as Panarin and Larkin have been, they've got to sustain this. Much like Gaudreau was, strong last season. So
yeah, if somebody has a Mark Stone like rally in the second
Yeah.
half, yeah. Russ, what do you think?
Right now, I've got Dylan Larkin 1, not because he was my preseason pick, just because when I watch him, no, because just his all-around game. It's more than just looking at points in the rookie standings, and for that reason, actually, Panarin's actually fallen to 4th for me, because I've noticed that he isn't playing a great all-around game, and that's something that I do take into consideration. Number 2, I've got John Gibson, because I don't think Anaheim would be anywhere without John Gibson, who, by the way, is, I think, 2nd or 3rd in the league in shutouts for the short amount of time that he's played this year, with a .926 save percentage. So that's another thing where I think we have to look at John Gibson and realize the job he's doing there, because right now he has stolen a job again and probably not giving it up this time. Now the third one, maybe people will disagree. I think Colton Parayko is the reason we're all talking that Kevin Shattenkirk is available.
Yeah.
Because he's not going to have the most points. I think he has 19 points. But he's got a +11. He hits people hard. He does make them change their route. There's a lot of things Colton Parayko does that aren't going to show up on the stat sheet, but has had an immense, really, effect on St. Louis this year for the good, obviously.
Peter?
I've got, right now my 1 is Panarin, but, as to the points being made, what if you stuck Jack Eichel in his position? What's Jack Eichel doing with that supporting cast?
Right.
Let's so I see Russ's point here about Panarin and saying drop him down. Like, you could put Larkin, Eichel in there and watch what happens. So I mean, I've got Larkin, Eichel as my 2, and I'll put Panarin up above because he is well ahead in points. But his knock is that he's playing in Chicago. Then you got Larkin, Eichel. Then then I'll put down, I've got Reinhardt and Leclerc. And I think there's some interest in there. I don't really have it broken up in terms of that, but that's sort of my hierarchy. Panarin, then Larkin, Eichel, Reinhardt, Leclerc. And now the second half's going to decide who finishes strong and gets it, as far as I see.
Reinhardt's coming of age. I mean, yeah, he had a hat trick against Winnipeg. He's playing really well. I mean, right now
he's starting to look more like that junior guy, because the thing about Reinhardt, what made him so good in juniors was he always seemed to have that nose around the net. It wasn't like he was constantly in the crease, but he would know where that loose puck was. He would know where the play was going. He'd be able to get those goals, and now he's getting those goals.
Russ, in his 9 games last year, he looked scared. He looked like an 18-year-old, and maybe it was good to give him that taste, let him go back to junior, let him play in the World Junior, get stronger, and now I think he's much more acclimated to the NHL as a 19-year-old. I mean, I have Panarin because I think Panarin is going to continue to score if he stays on Kane's line. Larkin is going to be an integral part of the Red Wings. Not that this is a dark horse because everybody picked him to be one of the finalists. I think McDavid's going to come back and light it up in the second half. And in that division, it's not inconceivable that Edmonton could challenge for a third playoff spot in the Pacific. So if they make a run and they get into the playoffs and it's on the back of Connor McDavid lighting it up, I think he wins.
Let me add this about Panarin. Let's not forget that he has made the second line of the NHL championship team, and that the guy he's playing with, Patrick Kane, is having his best NHL season. And one of the reasons that people talk about that Kane is playing so well is that he has another player that thinks just like him. So I do agree with the thought that he's not as good an all-around player as Dylan Larkin, who, to me is phenomenal. But, what Panarin has accomplished in a short period of time is pretty impressive, even from an offensive standpoint, because it's not easy. I mean, when you're stepping in and playing in Buffalo, for example, with Jack Eichel, the roster isn't the same, but there's less pressure too. Panarin, came in and stepped right into the breach with the Blackhawks and, hasn't blinked.
Here's the other thing about Larkin. He has played one less game than Henrik Zetterberg and is 1 point off the team lead. Like, he's practically leading his team in scoring and a plus 22. I still think he's the best. I do.
We got about, I think, 8 or 9 games on the schedule. I'm trying to count them as we go here. But to me, the game of the night, looking forward to tonight's schedule, is Nashville at Chicago. Now, Nashville, after the trade, really they lost. I don't know. They lost the first 2 games after the trade with Johansson. I don't know if they played in the last couple days, but it's going to be interesting to see them go into the United Center against the Blackhawks, who are, one of the hottest teams in the league, and I guess they're only a couple points behind Dallas. So we're not, they've really put it together. Corey Crawford's playing great. They got Duncan Keith back, and the offense is hopping. Kevin, to me, this is the best match of the night.
Yeah, for sure. And right now in the West, everyone's measuring up to the Blackhawks. I mean, it's just so impressive. Like, the Blackhawks, I talked about them the other day, but having seen them now live recently, they have that second line that they've never really had before. Like, the most impressive thing about the Blackhawks is they won 3 cups, and they really have had, they have a lot of depth, but they don't have quite the consistency of their personnel that you would expect from a team that's won 3 cups in such a short period. And now all of a sudden they seem pretty set. And Anisimov and Kane and Panarin are a great second line, and really the best second line that they've had during this championship run in terms of the way they function. So they're pretty impressive, and Van Riemsdyk has really stepped in and been that fourth defenseman. They really haven't missed Oduya as much as I thought they would. And Roosevelt's still around. They're a pretty impressive group, the Blackhawks.
Russ, the other team that I'm intrigued by tonight, the Colorado have really played well in the last couple of weeks. As soon as they got Varlamov back in net, they were on a hot streak. They've climbed into the playoff race.
Yeah, Varlamov been big. That kid Andreas Martinson's been real nice for them, who they just found overseas and brought him in this year. McKinnon's on a tear. Matt Duchene's on a tear. I interviewed Duchene a couple of weeks ago, and and I reposted the article on Sportsology because I had asked him while he was away from the rink, this was like a different kind of event, about the World Cup, and he said he was interested in the World Cup the second he heard about it. And to me, that almost like told me that even though the way the season started for him was a little rocky, that he was going to really be fired up for this whole season because he knows he's one of those guys that's on the bubble sometimes to make that team, and now he's just been on a tear, especially since the trade talks. Mm-hmm. And this game, if they win and Nashville loses, Nashville's in trouble. I know they made this deal, but this is a bad place for Nashville to be in because if all of a sudden Colorado is going to have confidence and they possibly go ahead of Nashville point-wise, this is really going to hurt Nashville if Chicago beats them.
And Kevin, last thing, earlier in the season, there was beginning to be talk that Colorado would shop Tyson Berry before the deadline because he's an RFA, and maybe they weren't, interested in paying him the big money that he would get either in arbitration or on a long-term deal. And I've watched about 3 or 4 Colorado games over the last couple weeks, and he scored a big goal in almost every one of them. I mean, to me, for a blue line that has been criticized by me and other people for not being that great, he seems to be a part that they can't get rid of because he's so good offensively. I don't know whether they're still stuck on that that viewpoint of we got to move this guy because we don't want to pay him.
Well, you hope they wouldn't be, but we all thought that was going to happen to Ryan O'Reilly too. Like nobody in the NHL understood why they were so dead set on moving Ryan O'Reilly, and but ultimately they did. But I think you're right about Barry. I mean, he's proven his value, and those type of guys, you have to just accept their deficiencies to get their offense. So.
A great show, guys. I want to wish Eck a happy birthday. Him and the wife are spending time today, in eastern Pennsylvania, having a good time, going to see a movie or having dinner or whatever. And he'll be back tomorrow for another edition of the HockeyBuzzcast. For Peter Tessier, for Kevin Allen, for Russ Cohen, I'm Michael Agello. And remember, without the buzz, it's just hockey.